Rain had erased the road behind Clara Whitmore by the time she reached Blackwood Ranch. Mud dragged at her torn skirt. Blood had dried around one wrist, and the lights of 3 riders moved through the darkness behind her like hunting lanterns. She struck the barn door with the last strength. Elias Reed opened it, holding a lamp. He saw a soaked woman, a leather medical bag, and terror she was trying too hard. "Please don't send me back." Before he could answer, Clara pushed the bag into his hands and collapsed across the throat. Inside were a midwife's instruments, a shattered medicine bottle, and a ledger wrapped carefully in oilcloth. A wanted notice bearing Mayor Crow's seal hung on the fence outside. It named Clara as the woman responsible for an infant's death. The riders were close enough now for Elias to hear their horses breathing. He lifted Clara from the mud, carried her inside, and barred the barn without asking whether the accusation was true. Then the lamplight caught the dark stain across her palm. It was not blood. It smelled exactly like the poisoned feed that had already killed 9 of his finest cats. Clara woke beneath a cedar-scented quilt in a room that had... A woman's hairbrush rested beside them. A child's wooden horse stood on the shelf with one wheel missing. Someone had once belonged. Her medical bag sat unopened on a chair. The oilcloth ledger was still inside. Elias had searched nothing. She found him in the kitchen beside a black iron stove. He placed bread, beans, and coffee on the table without asking whether she deserved them. Clara refused to eat until she had offered to work. She could cook, clean, mend clothing, tend wounds, or sleep in the barn if the room held memories he wished to protect. Elias gave no explanation. He only made it clear that no sensible person would be sent into the storm. Until 3 nights earlier, Clara had lived behind the church in Rain. She delivered children in cabins, boarding houses, and wagons, stranded far from. Poor families paid her with eggs or firewood. Wealthier families forgot her name after their babies were safe. After her husband, Thomas, died beneath an overturned freight wagon, Clara kept working because grief could not fill a pantry. Then Mayor Silas Crow sent for her. His newborn grandson was already cold at the fingertips when she arrived. The child's breathing was weak and broken. Doctor Vernon Pike ordered Clara to use a cloudy medicine from an unmarked bottle. She refused. The liquid carried the bitter scent of something that could slow an infant's heart. Clara tried warmth, careful breathing, and the gentler remedies recorded in. The child died before sunrise. Pike accused her before the mother had finished weeping. By noon, Crow's men had searched Clara's home and found poison beneath her bed. She had never seen the bottle before. Neighbors closed their shutters. Mothers whose children she had delivered crossed the street rather than meet her. Clara knew a trial controlled by Crow would not seek the truth. It would bury it. She escaped with the ledger containing every symptom, treatment, and order from that. She had not run only to save herself. If Crow destroyed those pages, his lie would become permanent. Elias listened without promising belief. His silence left room for facts. He allowed her to stay until the rain passed. When Clara stepped outside for water, she found 3 cattle beside the eastern fence. Black foam stained the nearest steer's. Its legs were stiff, but its chest made one shallow movement. She dropped the bucket and knelt in the mud. The animal was not dead, and whatever was killing Elias Reed's herd carried the same bitter scent as the medicine dog Pike had placed in her hands. Elias found Clara kneeling beside the poisoned steer while rain soaked her. The animal's breathing was weak, but she insisted the sickness was not. Its eyes showed no fever, its tongue was dry, and the muscles along its belly tightened. Boyd Mercer, the ranch manager, wanted the steer destroyed before the others were exposed. He had already sent 2 workers for her. Clara stopped them. She crushed charcoal from the stove, mixed it with warm salt water, and added leaves gathered beside the creek. The remedy might absorb enough poison to give the animal a chance. Elias allowed her to continue. The ranch hands watched from beneath the barn roof. None trusted the woman named on Crow's wanted notice, but Clara ignored their whispers. She worked through the morning, forcing small amounts of the mixture between the steer's teeth, rubbing its throat until it swallowed, and checking its breathing until her fingers went numb. Near midday, the steer lifted its head. The movement was weak, but it silenced every man. Elias examined the animal himself. The fever Boyd had described was not. Clara had been right. He offered her temporary work at Blackwood Ranch in exchange for food and shelter. She could help in the kitchen, the barn, and wherever sick animals needed attention. The offer came with 3 conditions. She would not leave the ranch. She would warn him about anyone who followed. And she would never hide a danger that could harm Lucy, his workers, or the land. Clara accepted without asking for wages or sympathy. She requested only clean water, bandages, and access to the feed storage. That evening, Elias left coffee outside her bedroom. Beside the cup rested a small iron key. When Clara tested it in the lock, she understood. Elias had not given himself away to keep her inside. He had given her the power to keep everyone else out. Before sleeping, she returned to the eastern barn and searched the feeding troughs beneath the oats. Her fingers touched several hard blue-green grains that did not belong in. Someone had placed them there deliberately. Clara carried the blue-green grains into the kitchen before sunrise and spread them across a white. Under the lamp, their color looked unnatural against the clean porcelain. They were too hard to be seed and too bitter to be medicine for livestock. She wrapped 3 samples in separate scraps of cloth, marking each with the location of the trough. One came from the eastern barn. Another came from the pen holding the strongest cattle. The third had been buried beneath fresh oats near the. The poison had not been scattered carelessly. Someone had chosen which animals. Elias watched as Clara compared the samples with the dark residue. She explained that the grains softened in moisture and released a powder that attacked the stomach. A large animal might survive a newborn child would not. She did not need to say Dr. Pike's name. Elias unlocked the ranch office and placed the feed ledgers on the desk. Clara turned the pages slowly, following deliveries, payments, and handwritten corrections. She had kept accounts for Thomas's small medicine shop before his death. Numbers did not become honest merely because a respected man had. The records claimed that Blackwood Ranch had purchased 40 sacks of feed during the previous month. Only 29 had entered the storage. Several payments had been made to a supplier called Hollow Creek Provision Company, but no address appeared beneath them. The invoices carried the same circular mark Clara remembered seeing on the bottle. She concealed her reaction until Elias stepped outside to speak with a rancher. The symbol joined the death in red hollow to the dying cattle at Blackwood Ranch. Lucy found Clara sitting alone with the ledger. The girl placed a piece of bread beside her and asked whether a good person could become bad because an entire town said so. Clara closed the book. A lie, she explained, could wear the clothing of truth when powerful people repeated it often enough. That did not make the lie strong. It only made the truth lonelier. Lucy considered this before asking whether Clara was lonely. Clara could not answer. For anyone listening who believes Clara is hiding the truth for a reason, this is the moment to share that belief. Sometimes the first person to trust someone becomes the reason they find the courage to stand. Later, Clara opened her birth ledger and found the notes from Crow's house. The infant's blue lips, weak pulse, and broken breathing had all been recorded before Pike offered the cloudy medicine. Beside the entry, Clara had written the liquid's bitter odor and unusual green residue. It matched the grains from the cattle feed. That evening, she returned to the ranch records and discovered that one page had been torn out. The missing sheet covered the week when the first cattle became sick. Only a narrow strip remained. Across it, in dark ink, stood the beginning of a signature, Boyd Mercer. By morning, Clara had separated every sack of feed in the eastern storehouse. She marked the suspicious ones with red cloth and warned the ranch hands not to. Boyd objected at once. He claimed the blue-green grains were harmless mineral supplements and warned that Blackwood Ranch had only 5 days of clean feed. Throwing away the stored supply, he said, would ruin the ranch. Clara did not ask anyone to believe her. She placed 2 cages on the barn floor and borrowed 2 chickens. One received clean oats. The other received a few crushed grains from a sealed sack. Within an hour, the second bird stopped eating. Its legs weakened, and its breathing turned shallow. The first remained alert. Elias locked the storehouse himself. Clara then showed him that the poisoned sacks had been delivered only to pens holding the strongest steers marked for sale. The deaths were not random. Someone was destroying the ranch's income one shipment. She organized the workers into groups. They scrubbed the troughs with boiling water, sealed the poisoned grain inside empty barrels, and moved sick cattle into a dry pen. Clara taught the men to watch for trembling muscles, black foam, a stiff jaw, and sudden thirst. Animals found early received charcoal, salt water, and rest. The third evening, no new steer. The ranch hands who had avoided Clara began seeking her help. One brought a mare with a swollen. Another left clean bandages beside her. Even Elias began asking for her opinion before making decisions. Clara compared the feed deliveries with the ranch accounts. The cattle deaths always increased shortly before a bank representative arrived to inspect. Each weakened herd lowered the ranch's value. Each lower valuation pushed Elias toward. The pattern was too exact to be misfortune. That night, Lucy developed a fever. Elias carried her into the kitchen with fear plain on his face. Clara examined every medicine bottle before using it. The illness was only a winter chill, but Elias remained beside the bed as though looking away might cost him. Clara cooled Lucy's forehead and watched her breathing until the girl slept. In the quiet before dawn, Elias admitted that his wife and young son had died of fever 6 winters earlier, while he was trapped beyond the northern ridge in a snowstorm. Clara offered no empty comfort. She simply stayed until Lucy's temperature fell. At sunrise, a rider delivered a sealed notice. The bank intended to seize Blackwood Ranch in 10 days for failure to repay a loan. Elias read the paper twice. He had never borrowed the money, and the signature at the bottom was almost his. Elias spread the loan papers across the kitchen table while Clara placed older contracts beside them. The forged signature looked convincing, but she noticed one detail the banker had missed. Elias always lifted his pen before writing the second. The name on the loan had been copied in one unbroken motion. 3 figures had also been altered after the document was signed. The ink was darker, and the numbers leaned in another direction. Elias watched Clara work in silence. Her careful hands now rested over evidence that might save everything his family had built. They spent the next days searching old receipts and contracts. Between those hours, a quiet rhythm formed. Every morning, Elias left coffee near Clara's place before riding out. He remembered that she preferred less sugar but never mentioned it. When the lining of his winter coat tore, Clara repaired it with dark. Neither called these small acts affection. Lucy seemed to understand them. One afternoon, Elias lifted the girl onto a gentle mare and taught her how to hold the reins. Clara stood beside the fence as Lucy laughed. For the first time since leaving Red Hollow, Clara did not turn toward the road when she heard hoofbeats. She watched the child circle the corral and imagined a life measured by ordinary mornings instead of escape routes. The thought frightened her more than danger had. A storm arrived after sunset. Elias slipped while securing loose boards on the barn roof, and a nail tore his palm. Clara cleaned the wound beneath the lantern. Thunder broke above them, and she recoiled before she could stop herself. The sound carried her back to the night. Crow's men kicked open her door. Elias stepped away. He did not question her or touch her. He simply waited until her breathing slowed. His patience loosened something Clara had kept locked since arrival. She admitted that Crow's men had searched her home not only for poison, but for Thomas's business records. Before his death, her husband had discovered that ranches near Red Hollow were being forced into bankruptcy by loans their owners had never requested. A private company bought each property after the bank seized it. Clara pointed to the name beneath Blackwood's false loan notice. Hollow Creek Land and Provision Company. The same name appeared in the same circular symbol marked the poisoned medicine bottle. Thomas had written the company's name in his private accounts shortly before the wagon accident that killed him. Then Elias noticed movement. Boyd Mercer was leading his horse from the eastern storehouse. A sealed sack of poisoned feed lay across the saddle. Without a lantern, he rode toward Red Hollow. Mayor Silas Crow arrived at Blackwood Ranch shortly after sunrise. Dr. Vernon Pike rode beside him. 2 deputy sheriffs followed, and Boyd Mercer brought up the rear on Elias's own bay horse. They stopped outside the main gate while the ranch hands gathered near the barn. Crow held up a folded warrant bearing the county seal and announced that Clara Whitmore was under arrest for the murder of his grandson. Pike claimed she had fled Red Hollow after poisoning. He also accused her of contaminating the cattle feed to make Elias believe the same poison had been used against her. Boyd supported every word. He said Clara had demanded access to the storehouse, handled the feed alone, and created the illness so she could later pretend to cure it. The sealed sack found on his saddle, he insisted, had been taken to town as evidence. For several seconds, even the ranch hands looked uncertain. The accusation had been shaped carefully. Clara had touched the poisoned grain. She had treated the cattle. She was the only person at Blackwood Ranch whose name appeared on a wanted notice. Crow ordered Elias to open the gate. Clara stepped from the house before Elias could answer. She carried the oilcloth ledger against her chest. Her face was pale, but she did not hide behind. She offered to surrender on one condition. The ledger must be placed directly into the hands of the county sheriff and examined in the presence of witnesses. It would not be given to Crow, Pike, or either. Crow refused too quickly. He declared the book stolen property and demanded that it be surrendered before Clara. Elias understood then that Crow feared the pages more than the woman. He asked to inspect the. Crow hesitated, then passed it through the bars. Elias studied the seal, the charge, and the name written beneath the authorization. The document claimed Judge Weller had signed it 2 days earlier. Elias knew the judge had left for Cheyenne the previous week to attend his daughter's funeral. The signature might have looked genuine to anyone who did not know where. The date made it impossible. Elias folded the warrant and handed it back. He did not draw his revolver. He did not threaten the deputies or raise his voice. He merely stood between the gate and Clara. No one would enter Blackwood Ranch until the county sheriff confirmed. Crow warned that protecting a fugitive would destroy Elias's name, cost him his land, and make every worker at the ranch in a. Elias remained still. If you came for trouble, you found it. If you came for her, you'll leave disappointed. The deputies shifted uneasily. Neither wanted to force the gate over a warrant that might be false. Crow's expression hardened. Before turning his horse, he revealed the advantage he still possessed. Hollow Creek Land and Provision Company had petitioned the bank to move the foreclosure. Blackwood Ranch would be sold at auction the following. 9 days had vanished from the original notice. Crow rode away with Pike, Boyd, and the deputies, leaving dust suspended over the road. Clara looked at Elias and understood what his decision had cost him. By protecting her, he had placed his ranch, his reputation, and the last remains of his family's legacy between Crow and the truth. Would you have opened the gate and surrendered Clara, or stood beside her when every visible piece of evidence made her appear guilty? Share your answer in the comments. That afternoon, a new auction notice was nailed to Blackwood's fence. At the bottom, beneath the bank seal, was the name of the only registered Hollow Creek Land and Provision Company. Elias did not ride after Crow. Anger would give the mayor exactly one gunshot or reckless threat could turn a forged warrant into proof that Blackwood Ranch sheltered criminal. Instead, Elias locked the gate, posted 2 trusted ranch hands near the road, and sent his oldest worker to find the county sheriff. Then he returned to the house and spread every document across the kitchen table. Clara worked beside him through the afternoon. They compared the poisoned feed invoices, the false loan, and Thomas's account pages. Near sunset, she found an old receipt bearing Dr. Pike's initials beside the purchase of a large quantity of blue-green poison. It proved Pike had obtained the substance. It did not prove how he had used it. Clara opened her birth ledger again. Thomas had repaired its thick leather cover shortly before his death, adding a stiff layer beneath the back. She remembered how carefully he had stitched it closed and warned her never to let. Using a small knife, Elias cut through the thread. Several folded papers slipped onto the table. One listed 6 ranches seized through loans their owners had never signed. Another traced every sale to Hollow Creek Land and Provision Company. The final page was a letter in Thomas's hand. He wrote that Mayor Crow controlled the company through hidden names. Dr. Pike supplied substances used to weaken livestock, while men inside the ranches altered records and created false debts. At the bottom, Thomas had added one warning. If he died before presenting the evidence, his death should not be treated as an accident. Elias wanted Clara to remain at Blackwood while he carried the papers to the auction. Crow had already tried to arrest her, and the town was filled with people who believed she was guilty. Clara folded Thomas's letter and returned it to the. She had spent too many nights running so the truth could survive. Now the truth required her voice. Elias did not order her to stay. He saddled a second horse. As they prepared to leave, Lucy ran from the barn with dirt on her hands. Beneath the leather lining of Boyd's saddle, she had found the missing page from the ranch ledger. It carried the poisoned feed deliveries, payments from Hollow Creek, and several attempts to copy Elias Reed's signature. The auction had already begun when Elias and Clara reached Red Hollow. Rainwater ran from the horses as they stopped outside the courthouse square. Ranchers stood beneath the awnings, silent and uneasy, while a bank clerk read the terms of sale from the steps. Blackwood Ranch had been valued far below its worth. No one challenged the price. There was only one registered Hollow Creek Land and Provision Company. Mayor Crow stood beside the clerk, with Pike and Boyd Mercer near. He wore the calm expression of a man who believed the ending had already been written. Clara walked through the crowd holding the ledger against her chest. Whispers followed her. More darer, fugitive, poisoner. She did not lower her head. Elias moved beside her, not ahead of her. He had protected her at the gate. Now he allowed her to carry the truth herself. Crow ordered the deputies to arrest her. Clara opened the ledger before either man could move. She placed the missing ranch page, Thomas's letter, Pike's receipt, and the false loan on the auction table. The evidence did not stand. It formed a single chain. The poisoned feed deliveries were recorded under Boyd's name. Payments had come from Hollow Creek. On the back of the missing page were several clumsy attempts to copy Elias Reed's signature. The false loan used the best imitation. Thomas's hidden records showed that Blackwood was not the first ranch targeted. 6 other properties had been weakened by unexplained livestock deaths, false debts, and sudden bank seizures. Each had later been purchased by the same company. Crow dismissed the papers as inventions created by a wanted woman and her dead husband. Clara turned to Dr. Pike. Her notes from the night of the infant's death recorded the child's blue lips, weak pulse, and irregular breathing before Pike offered the cloudy medicine. She had refused to use it because of the green residue and bitter scent. The same substance had been found in. Pike claimed the symptoms meant. Clara replied that the child had been born with a failing heart. The poison had not caused the original illness, but Pike had tried to use it after death to create a false explanation and force her signature onto the record. She had refused. That refusal made her dangerous. Crow had planted the bottle in her house, issued the false warrant, and hunted her because the ledger proved the child had been dying before Clara arrived. It also contained the final records Thomas had gathered before his wagon overturned on an empty road. The mayor had not framed Clara merely to protect his family's name. He had framed her to recover the evidence hidden in her book. Then Clara revealed the final entry from Thomas's papers. Hollow Creek Land and Provision Company was owned through 3 false names, but every payment ended in an account controlled by Silas Crow. The sale of Blackwood Ranch would place the last open water route in the valley under his control. When the new railway came through, every neighboring ranch would be forced to pay him for access. The dying cattle, the false loan, Clara's arrest, and Thomas's death were not separate. They were parts of the same plan. For the first time, Crow's certainty broke. He reached for the ledger, but Elias placed one hand on the table between them. Crow laughed and reminded the crowd that evidence presented by a fugitive carried no legal. A voice answered from behind him. The county sheriff had arrived. He stepped onto the courthouse stairs with Judge Weller beside him and announced that Clara Whitmore was not the only person whose testimony would be heard that. The county sheriff stepped onto the courthouse stairs and stopped. Judge Weller stood beside him and examined the warrant Crow had used at. He confirmed that he had never signed it. On the date written beneath his name, he had been in Cheyenne for his daughter's funeral. The deputies moved away from Crow. Clara placed the evidence across the auction table in the order she had discovered it. She did not ask for pity. She let the records speak. Her birth ledger showed that Crow's grandson had signs of heart failure before she arrived. The medicine Pike ordered her to use contained the same blue-green poison later found in Blackwood's cattle. The missing ranch page recorded Boyd's deliveries and payments from Hollow. On the back were repeated attempts to copy Elias's signature. Thomas's hidden papers connected 6 stolen ranches to the same company. The sheriff questioned Boyd. At first, Boyd repeated Crow's story. Then the sheriff placed Pike's poison receipt beside the payment records and explained the prison sentence that could follow. Boyd's courage failed. He admitted that Crow had paid him to poison Blackwood's strongest cattle. Pike supplied the grains. Boyd altered the records, forged Elias's name, and planted the bottle beneath Clara's bed. Pike tried to leave, but a clerk from his medicine shop stepped forward. He confirmed that Pike had ordered the poison under a false name. Crow called them liars. Judge Weller then read the ownership record of Hollow Creek Land and Provision Company. The final name was Silas Crow. The square fell silent. The sheriff arrested Crow for forgery, fraud, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. Pike and Boyd were taken beside him. The auction was declared invalid. Blackwood's false debt was suspended, and the 6 earlier ranch seizures. Clara stood on the courthouse steps while people who had once avoided her struggled to meet her eyes. No apology could return Thomas or erase the fear she had. Still, One woman came forward carrying a boy Clara had delivered years earlier. She took Clara's hands and said she had never believed. Others followed. When the sheriff asked who had uncovered the poison and preserved the evidence, Elias faced the town. He told them Blackwood Ranch still stood because the woman they had called a murderer had refused to let another innocent life be destroyed. If this story reminds you that truth can be delayed without being defeated, share it with someone who needs that hope, and subscribe for more stories where patience leads justice home. After the square emptied, Elias found Clara beside the horses. She told him her name was clean again. Then she said she would leave Blackwood Ranch at sunrise. Clara packed her medical instruments before dawn. She folded each cloth carefully, placed the bottles inside her leather bag, and returned Thomas's letter to the hidden space in the... Her name had been Crow could no longer hunt her, and no false warrant waited beyond the gate. For the first time in months, she was free to leave. Elias found her beside the wagon as pale morning light spread across Blackwood Ranch. He carried an envelope containing her wages and a letter recommending her skills to any doctor, rancher, or family who might. He did not tell her that the ranch needed her. He did not mention Lucy's affection or the cattle she had saved. He would not turn gratitude into a chain. He only said the gate would remain open, whether she returned after 1 day or 20 years. Clara accepted the envelope with both hands. That simple respect hurt more than any plea. Every man who had controlled her life had spoken as though shelter came with ownership. Elias offered her a future without demanding a place inside. Lucy appeared from the barn, carrying Clara's blue shawl. She asked whether people could find a family twice. Clara looked toward the house. Smoke rose from the chimney. Fresh hay waited near the recovered. The repaired fence shone silver with morning. Nothing about Blackwood Ranch was grand, yet every corner held evidence of lives choosing to care. Elias stood several steps away, giving her room. Clara climbed into the wagon. Her hands closed around the reins. Then she remembered the key he had left beside her coffin. It had never been meant to imprison her. It had given her the right to decide who could enter. She stepped down again, asked whether she was certain. Clara told him she had come to Blackwood seeking one safe. She had expected food, perhaps a dry blanket. Instead, he had given her time to speak, room to be afraid, and the dignity of being believed only after her actions proved. She would not stay because she had nowhere else to go. She would stay because this was where she wished to build what came next. Months later, the front room of the ranch house became a small clinic. Clara delivered children, treated workers, and cared for sick animals across the valley. Elias repaired shelves, carried water, and left coffee beside her papers every morning. One spring evening, Lucy ran across the yard and called Elias Pop. Then she took Clara's hand and called her Mama. Neither adult corrected. Clara stood beside Elias at the barn door where she had once collapsed in the... It became home the night you opened this door, she said. Elias looked at the warm windows, the child between them, and the land they had saved together. Then he reached for Clara's hand only after she reached for his. Reached for his. Reached for his. Reached for his.